There
we go.
Do we decide on a moderator?
Take it away, Jess.
Oh, okay. I apologize in advance because I will probably have to leave a little bit early, but I am looking forward to this presentation by Homa. I will keep a queue in the chat as usual, just with questions and comments. Prefer that as opposed to raising your hand because it's a little harder to keep track of the order of things. So just type in the chat box if you have a question or comment and we'll keep track there. But I am not going to take up any more time because you know, a little delay getting started. So Homa, why don't you share your screen, get going? Welcome, looking forward to it.
Yeah, super. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jess. Hi, everyone. Today, I have my presentation on a framework for analyzing safeguards at the World Trade Organization. And my name is Homa Taheri, and I'm a second-year PhD student of economics at IU, and I'm interested in trade policy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Homa, and I'm sorry for running late. This is going to be great.
Thank you. I will first start with providing some explanation about what safeguards are, and then I will continue with my early version of IAD framework for safeguards, and then I will have a quick literature review on this. A more extended version is in the research, the main document that I have shared with everyone, I believe. And finally, I will finish with conclusion. So safeguards are trade policy measures at the World Trade Organization. The important point is that other like trade agreements, either bilateral or multilateral, also have safeguards. The majority of them have, but in this work, I'm only focusing on the one at the WTO. They are based on the Agreement on Safeguards and Article 19 of General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. They are emergency actions. They are in response to increased imports of particular products. Countries are allowed to have safeguards only if without being challenged at the WTO, only if they can prove their domestic industries have experienced serious injury, being caused or threatened to cause. Sorry, my wording is not perfect. By the export of the trading partners, they can be either in the form of quantitative import restrictions or increase in duties. And in fact, there are temporary suspension of a country's international commitments, and they cover imports from all trading partners. And with one exemption to that all trading partners part is that developing countries with a small share in exports to that country of interest, like below some threshold, are exempt from that safeguards. And there is a history behind safeguards. In the WTO, before like the GATT, the kind of institution prior to WTO began in 1946, and there was no kind of safeguards was already there, but because of like the particular arrangements to safeguards under the GATT, countries were more interested in not applying safeguard and instead go for so-called gray area measures like bilateral voluntary export restraints, like or VRs, to limit imports of certain products. An important example is like VAR of the US on automobile exports from Japan in early 1980s. But the legality of such measures under the GATT were not very clear. the current agreement on safeguards clearly prohibits such measures. And that change in kind of institutional changes in the safeguards has been followed by a more interest of countries for applying safeguards. For example, in the 46 years of GATT between 1948 to 1994, only 150 cases were initiated by 24 countries, and majority of them were developed countries, say like Australia, US, and Europe. Europe but since 2000, in the time period of my study, which is goes between 1995 to 2018, 172 safeguards have been applied by 36 countries, and majority of them are developing countries like India or Indonesia. And there has been a somehow like increasing trend in applying safeguards. Many of them were in response to like major like global level events in the history since 1995, so like entrance of China to the WTO, or the 2008 financial crisis. And on the importance of safeguards, I want to say that they're important because they provide flexibility to countries to have some like policy space when they experience uncertainties, either at the domestic level or international level, so they can control the flow of their imports. And there's actually a history, a literature on the fact that this flexibility has encouraged many countries to sign the WTO agreement based on the fact that countries that undertook larger tariff reductions in the Uruguay round of negotiations were more frequent users of safeguards after the establishment of WTO. So my work today that I'm presenting today is about Safeguard Committee. It's where the international, multi-country interactions happen at the WTO about safeguards. Article 13 of Agreement on Safeguards establishes a committee in which countries go and on a periodically and discuss their safeguard cases, and it's open to discussion by different members if they have any objections to safeguards if they want to provide supportive information orally about why they apply safeguards, they go to this committee. Its role is to monitor compliance and implementation of the agreement on safeguards according to Article 12 of Agreement on Safeguards, and it's the institution that receives notifications by the WTO members that they want to actually apply safeguards. So the next part that I want to discuss about, which is where the domestic participants become important, is the investigation requirements of applying safeguards. So they can only be applied if authorities of different countries do some investigation about effect of imports on the domestic economy, but this agreement of safeguard doesn't have any detailed procedural requirements on how should it be done, or it has like a very like general notation about requirements. And in fact, it has been a source of many discussions. And yeah, that's it. In the next part, I will talk about the my framework for studying this safeguard committee. The common pool resource of interest in this environment is applied tariff rates, and it is rival. So to verify that it's a common pool resource, I need to check two factors: if it's rival, if the exclusion is not possible. My claim is that it's not rival because, it is rival because an increase in import market share that it provides for one trading partner can be realized at the cost of decreased market share of other trading partners. And its exclusion is not possible because of two factors. First is that when a country applies a safeguard, it applies to all the trading partners. I mean, if they want to follow the rule, and after like exempting the developing countries, that is one factor. And second, once they increase their import tariff, or they put a quota on their import, they should do it on an MFN or most favored nation basis, which means like do it like do the same thing for everyone, to not to discriminate against or in favor of any trading partner. So the action arenas in this environment are at two levels of international and domestic levels. At the international level, the Safeguard Committee at the WTO is where like participants that are WTO members and observer governments at the WTO, or like representatives of these international organizations can be present. It's where like decisions are made and interactions happen. The second action arena is the domestic level, and it's where the interaction between lobby groups and the national governments happen. So in my earlier slide, I had that like investigation process for by the national authorities to verify if it's actually needed to apply safeguards. It's where like lobby groups enter the context. The outcomes of these two international level and domestic level are interdependent, because in the sense that decisions that countries make at the Safeguard Committee has a kind of has a signal for like about a particular case, has a like provides information, has signal about other similar cases in other countries, and it has like information for the lobby groups or authorities, like domestic level authorities in other countries, so that they know more about the system and they can adjust their decisions, their future decisions. And also at the domestic level, once the country goes through that process of applying safeguards and presenting the case at the Safeguard Committee, it has a like a again it has a learning process for the at the domestic level, so that their future decisions can be affected by the earlier experiences. The action situations are nested in the sense that it's this decisions at the like WTO and the way like rules of the game are set are at 4 governance levels. Like the highest level is biannual ministerial conferences, which decide about major concerns, and second level is general councils that that are held in the meantime and decide about lower level decisions. And at the lower level, again, is the Council for Trade in Goods, Trade in Services, and trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, and that are all working under the General Council. And this Committee on Safeguards is relatively at the bottom level, and works on the Council for Trade in Goods reporting to this council. So one thing is that is not part of the current work, and it's like open to work in future, is that I couldn't, given my time constraint and all those things, I couldn't study further about the feedback loops, like back and forth between these different levels of governance that lead to the decisions of the Safeguards Committee. I have it in my conclusion, but a future work would be like studying this two-way or multi-way interactions. On the different levels of rules, so operational rules about implementation decisions are happening at the country level. This is the country authorities that decide about procedures. They decide it domestically and then report it about their procedures to the Committee on Safeguards. And then at the next level, it's Safeguard Committee that is recipient of different notifications by the countries about their decision over safeguards, and it's where that discussion, like regular discussions, happens about like what to do next, or how to resolve like committee level disagreements about different cases. And the constitutional level rules are set at that like highest level biannual ministerial meetings that have safeguards in their agenda. So it hasn't been for a while, but in case that it happens, it's where in those biannual ministerial meetings the important things happen. And the enforcement tool here is the dispute settlement system. So safeguards are structured in a way that countries apply safeguards. So for applying it, they don't ask for permission from anyone. They just apply safeguards, and they inform Committee on Safeguards that, hey, we applied safeguards. But the countries that are affected by those safeguards have this freedom to evaluate the decision process of that country that have initiated the safeguard and raise a case to the dispute settlement system at the WTO and challenging that decision, challenging that safeguard. And as a matter of fact, in all the cases that have been raised to the dispute settlement system, and a country or a couple of countries have challenged any safeguard cases, in all the cases that they have been successful, and in all cases the the countries that have applied safeguards have been asked to cancel their decision. And so this is like the like kind of the kind of framework that I have in mind is that, so we have two, like in a like a simple two-country model, that we have two countries, A and B, with their own domestic interest groups or like lobby groups that demand like protection against some against imports, and they are at the domestic level, they have their own like action arena, they have their own like particular participants, and then at the safeguard committee, it's where they the international level interactions happens and decisions are made. And so here I have a just very short literature review. So from the economics literature, there is, so the, I mean, I said that the more extended version is in the research. I brought, I think, the most related cases. One is the 1999 paper of Bagwell and Steger that studied the reciprocity and non-discrimination at GATT, which practically applies to WTO. And Sykes is an important scholar working on the like challenges at the about agreement on safeguards and suggesting like ways to improve it. An important like other resource that I don't have it here is a 2009 book of Bernard Hochman, Chapter 9, that has a extended discussion about institutional, like has a like institutional approach to study the safeguard. But the general impression that I have from studying, so I'm an economics student and I'm more familiar with that context, but my general understanding is that there like it's not like a topic that is extendedly discussed in the literature from like institutional perspective. And on the conclusion, I would say that it's my early proposal for applying the IAD framework for studying safeguards. It doesn't take account for feedback loops in the hierarchical relationship in the nested action situations, and the future research can focus on that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Homa. Well done. So you saw, I just reminded everybody in the chat just to use, if you could, that space to ask questions or offer comments. I don't see any just yet, so I might, oh, Brian, never mind. I'll let you go, and then I have a question or two. Go ahead, Brian.
I'll let you go first if you want. Okay, I have both a question and a comment. And so the broad question is kind of what's the research question and the motivation? It's real clear what you want to do applying IAD, and it seems like an interesting topic to apply IAD and so on. But why or what motivates you is not coming through so clearly. And then to get more specific and technical, I didn't look at the whole paper, but where you talk about defining the resource, and you could bring up that slide if you want. To me, that seems like a place to think more deeply about what's going on and not just put it in one of these 4 boxes of what kind of goods, but think about what kind of interaction is going on. And that's where we come back to the basics of international trade. It's not purely rival. It's not a zero-sum game. The potential is for everybody to win-win, but there are distributional conflicts about some people may gain more or less, or some people may do things that actually help them and hurt others. And so how do you set up rules to cope with that kind of combination of cooperation and conflict, which to me would seem a really interesting part of what you could look at. But again, the more basic question is, okay, kind of what are you particularly interested to figure out, solve as a problem, or motivation? Thanks.
Can I two finger on that, Homa? Because my question is very related.
Sure.
Is that okay? Which is, so I really agree with a lot of what Brian said, and specifically, I would just add, you have a sort of slide that's a sort of a cursory lit review at the end, and it strikes me that, of course, this is the Ostrom workshop, and we would love to apply the IAD wherever we can. However, it's never a bad idea to think about, like, what is it that other theories are failing to explain here that justifies the application of the IAD framework, right? What purchase does it get you that existing theories don't? And this gets to Brian's question, right? Of like, if, once the research question is really distilled very clearly, that will, I think, help you to answer this secondary question, right? But what is the literature, what is the conflict in the literature, the gap in the literature that this application of the IAD framework is trying to resolve for you?
I should say that I have applied the IAD framework my study began by reviewing the literature, the economic literature on the topic, and realizing that it has been more of a political economy analysis of what is happening within countries, like two different, as if it's like two different words. It's like within country analysis, countries about studying about how like welfare considerations or lobbying enter the objective function of governance when deciding what to do, what policy to choose. And then, so it's one series of like papers and literature that I have read, and a second round, which are more books, not like that Bernard Hoekman's books, and not papers. They are studying what is happening at the international level at the Safeguard Committee and how it works and what's the history and all that. But I didn't see in my research, I didn't see any place connecting these two. That hey, how these are going in somehow like related. They are going somehow in parallel. I didn't see that much of a connection in studying safeguards. And when I as a fellow, like Ostrom fellow, when I got introduced with the IAD framework, I thought that it's a good, it could be a good structure for a good lens through which I can see how both domestic and international events are happening together. And the second question of why this IAD and not any other thing, it's I didn't compare IAD with anything else. It's what I learned, and given like the like 1 semester time that I had for like learning one framework, one tool, and then applying to my research question, I just went with that. I didn't compare it IAD with anything else. I'm saying IAD is better in some sense from others for answering this question. I hope that I answered.
Okay, that's super helpful. You might just consider following up with what is the outcome of interest that the IAD helps you explain, particularly why is it that understanding both the domestic and international interaction of sort of safeguards, what does that help us understand that looking at one or the other doesn't? So just one thing to sort of think about as you move forward, but that was a really helpful explanation. Sally, you're next, and then I think the queue is open.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you for the presentation. So, well, I want to build upon what you said, Jess, on the distinction between a framework and a theory. I think, a framework is different than a theory in a sense that a framework does not propose, a causal relationship between sets of variables. Rather, a framework defines the sets of variables that could apply to any theory. So it's broader. In a sense, a framework is broader than a theory, and I think its purpose is more for identification than identifying causal dynamics. So I'm not sure whether asking the question, I'm not an expert, just a student of Ostrom's. I'm not sure whether asking the question of can this framework account for what's missing in, is this framework rivalrous to this theory, or how does this framework respond to existing theories? I'm not sure if this is the right question, but a framework could be very useful, to identify different theories or provide different explanations for rivalrous theories. But I would be interested to hear, the perspectives of scholars who are, who worked with frameworks, and if we could perhaps, if we have time, discuss about difference between a framework and theory, I think that would be very helpful as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally.
Are there other questions? That's a great point, Sally. Really well, I think, really good thoughts to sort of think about whether a framework is doing different work than a theory and what it can actually help us. Great. You had a citation in there. All right, what else? Any other thoughts and comments? I haven't seen any more coming up. We could continue this conversation about theories versus frameworks, but I want to open the queue here. See if folks have additional.
I just had a quick thought, Jess. I'm not sure if it's okay just to jump in really quick. Is that all right?
Go for it.
And I apologize, guys. I'm still driving to the workshop for Eaton's box lunch thing. So for anybody on campus, remember, feel free to swing by. But no, just in brief on that point of alternatives to IAD and just kind of different conceptual frameworks to kind of think through. I kind of started my doctoral studies, Homa, for what it's worth, way back in the day, looking at international trade, but primarily bilateral investment treaties. And there, there's this network of thousands of them, right? And I did some early work trying to look at, to what extent there was an emerging polycentric system, and what under that conceptualization it would help us understand about the direction of investment, and to a broader extent trade law. And we wound up writing that up, and Angie might remember, because I think you were a co-author on this paper. It was one with Eric, Angie, a few years ago. But we'll find the site for you. But I wanted to throw that out. Maybe get Brian and others' thoughts about the utility of using that framing as well, just to kind of think through some of the benefits and drawbacks of this topical area and your specific research questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Brian, you were specifically pointed to. Oh, Angie.
Sorry, I'm throwing the link in the chat that Scott was just mentioning.
Brian, I think you were particularly referenced. Do you want to weigh in?
I think I'm not clear enough on what Scott was implying beyond just the broader framework of mutual gains from international trade. So,
I mean, one way to think about this is, we could think of like Putnam and two-level gains, right? It's sort of a theory, but it's actually more of a framework for thinking about the interaction between domestic and international factors. And so, I think Sally's point is a very good one. Theories often specify causal mechanisms and the relationship between some input and some output that we might care about. We might also think about frameworks, and I think this is where Scott was going, correct me if I'm wrong, like allowing us to think differently about something and what that might help us gain or understand that we wouldn't otherwise be able to, right? And so I think, Sally, you're totally right. A theory is maybe a smaller and more causally oriented aspect of a framework, or maybe is implied by a particular framework, right? But I do think that this sort of, again, builds on Brian's initial point, which is that I think that we do want to say, okay, what are the things that like IAD gets us here, right? Like what is helpful about it? And again, like we're all here in this virtual space, so we think that it's important, right? But I think that you could spell it out more, particularly with respect to like, okay, there's this failure to account for domestic versus international politics around safeguards, right? Are there sort of either joint outcomes, or are there variables that this framework allows us to consider that we would otherwise be missing?
Can I maybe, if Homa or other people are still thinking, maybe I can, propose some thoughts?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah, I think what IAD can enable us is to identify the variables that will be interest to our study. So it will be a means to organize, and in a fashion that's easy to communicate with other researchers. What are the specific variables? How do we operationalize these variables? And what can be the interaction mechanisms between these variables? So, and using this overall map, then we can move down to specific hypotheses motivated by certain theories. So in other words, IAD framework would provide us a general picture, of action situations. And then from that image, we can maybe zoom in to certain action arenas, then zoom back out, or, analyze certain components that we deem more important than the others. But, I think, yeah.
Thank you. Renzo?
Hi, Homa.
Hi.
Thanks for sharing your work. It's the first time I hear about these kinds of safeguards. So thank you. It's just something that I started learning from you right now. But I have just a general question about the process or the exercise of using the IAD in this context. What do you think you have learned about the problem that you're trying to examine as you were trying to apply the framework in that context? Has it helped you organize your thoughts, map actors, relationships better, or just broadly, what do you think you have gained in terms of thinking more clearly about this particular issue? Just about the process of using it as you were trying to, unwind the problems and the interactions that you were trying to examine here.
I think one aspect that really mattered to me was kind of disentangling different like rules, where are they coming from and how they're shaped, and the process they can be modified. In the previous, in my previous education, or what I had learned before, rules were, I would say, rules were given, taken as given, and they were not themselves the subject of a study, or themselves kind of a parameter that can be set at the operational or constitutional, like at the three levels. Here, what I learned and in my work, try to address, not perfectly, but try to address, was to taking the rules themselves as a subject of a study. I think that was missing in the previous works that I had read.
Excellent, thank you.
Brian? You're muted.
Okay, yeah, I'll just go ahead and offer as one example of somebody saying, if we look at this as a multi-level system, we see something different with big implications for policy and action. And the reference is in the paper, and it's a title I love because Prisoners of the Wrong Dilemma, why distributive conflict, not collective action, characterizes the politics of climate change. And basically saying all this attention to kind of Kyoto, Paris, getting international agreement has missed very important point that is the argument is the most important battles are at the national level to overcome fossil fuel interests. And this huge amount of scholarship and so on and effort is again missing what's necessary to make the difference. So the question would be, for the issues you're interested in, okay, does looking at these multiple connected arenas, this multiple level game, give potentially some important insights about things people have been missing because they haven't been looking at the linkages that you're interested in. So just.
So, and thank you. And I just remembered that you had a earlier question about being having trade as a zero-sum game or as a cooperative. I forgot to respond that, but I think that's like that attitude of having. So it's not something that I studied here. I haven't studied it, but I can. But my initial thought is that that attitude toward being like competitive or cooperative is going to happen at that international level of arena, at the like safeguard committee, in where countries bring their cases and they have conversations about what should we have done. But so there is a literature on that in in economics, and I think so Professor Beskar is also here, so I think his work is it's really close to this topic, but it's not part of my study in this work, so that I cannot answer it in an evidence-based manner.
If I can comment, I would just say I think it's important to be concerned and thinking about as a policy, because otherwise the challenge is so many people, including the past US president, tend to look at trade as if there's going to be winners and losers, and is a really destructive approach to things and misses huge opportunities. And on a more conceptual level, again, realist theory in international relations often assumes nations are rivals, and therefore assumes that somebody's going to win, somebody's got to lose, and I should pursue my country's advantage rather than my country's benefit. And so, this is the space where there's a chance for, again, gains, which is the whole reason behind GATT and WTO and arguments about international trade, is we can make ourselves better off, but we may need some rules to try and do it fairly and productively. So stop there.
Correct.
I think that's a good point though, Brian. So maybe it is one of the, so I'm going to jump in. So sorry. And I'm waiting for questions to pop up too. But I do think that might be something that I missed in the paper, and it doesn't mean it's not in there. It might just be that maybe think about emphasizing it slightly differently, is the reason that the mechanisms are in place for enforcement in these particular, several of these documents, actually, the WTO isn't the only one, is these are fostered out of a period of time when we were looking to be more cooperative as a global community. And I don't think that's in there, and maybe it should be more. And I'm not convinced. It's your paper, but I think that changes the conversation in some key areas.
Uh-huh.
And so I just throw that out there as a suggestion to dig back in how these how that approach created the structure it is that you're analyzing. Because actually, for example, when I teach this, I'm a lawyer and I teach this and the students are like, what is this cooperation? What, aren't we supposed to be suing people? And I literally am like, no, lawyers are terrifying. If you walk in the room like, who am I going to sue? You don't want the lawyer in the room almost always. So, the WTO and GATT really come from a different perspective. And I didn't believe when I looked through this that came through clearly. Now that might not, it might be that it's in your head. So I don't mean that as a, but part of that builds it helps us understand how you've walked through some of these steps, I guess, is part of my comment. And so to me, that's a different perspective. And because I didn't pick it up necessarily very clearly, it may have altered some things along the way. And I wonder if I read some other parts of your paper slightly different because it wasn't clear to me which perspective you were taking. Because I agree with Brian, there's clearly a different view of trade. Not only are there winners and losers, there are winners and losers, and there are people that we can all agree to cooperatively try to squash, unfortunately, that the global community oftentimes comes through trade. So I just throw that out there. So I guess I'm echoing Brian and also saying, I also didn't see that aspect in the paper, and it's up to you, but maybe that needs to come through a little clearer.
Thank you.
If you intend for that, right? Mustafa, I see your hand up.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Homa. I don't know this framework IAD, and I think it's potentially very useful. So one problem that I have tried to figure out in my own work is the way that safeguards are treated so differently under the GATT and under the WTO. And Angie's comment actually reminded me of that, because under the GATT, the safeguard process is very diplomatic, but under the WTO, it is very legalistic. That's like a lot of suing. Like under the GATT, you don't sue people, you just try to find a solution and in a diplomatic way. And the court doesn't really mean much under the GATT, but under the WTO, you have a court that looks like a domestic court. And so you can sue countries, and even if they don't agree, under the GATT, everyone has had to agree on punishments. But here you don't have to get the agreement of the country that you are going to punish. So you can just get the authorization from the WTO court. And I think this IAD framework might be helpful in understanding the differences between these two systems, because a lot of lawyers, especially in fact in the WTO, criticize this change from a diplomatic structure to a legalistic structure, because they thought we don't have a serious court, so we cannot really have a legalistic approach here. And I think maybe one angle that you can study is the diplomatic versus legalistic feature of these two systems.
Thank you.
Other individuals?
Yeah, I will jump in.
Oh, okay.
If no one else wants to say something. So I also used IAD in my dissertation, analyzing local governance in Tunisia. And so from maybe my experience will be useful for you in terms of my interactions with the committee members. So some of my committee members are very theory driven. And, I get bombed with questions of, so how does IAD explain, how does IAD contribute to us that other theories fail to contribute, So I think it might be a good idea to think about this if you are thinking of building your thesis on the basis of this chapter. You might also consider supplying this framework, in addition to this framework that enables you to capture the most general set of variables for your interest, also engage with specific theories as well.
Interesting. So in your framework, you you explained how it's related to different theories.
Yeah, so my framework, basically, I can share it with you too, provides a very general overview of, local governance interactions in Tunisia, the different action arenas that are interconnected with each other. Then each chapter of my dissertation zooms in to specific set of interactions. But I still get pushbacks from committee members, who question the value of IED framework in terms of its theoretical contributions. So I think, it might be helpful to communicate this with your committee members if you have chosen them. So you are a second year student, so it's a bit early, but
Thank you.
I was just gonna piggyback a little bit off of Solly's point, what he was talking about, because I also I don't use IID in my dissertation, but I kind of drew a few lessons from it, and kind of how, in thinking about election violence, how we think about it happening in different places based on who is targeted. And so, but what kind of initially, I guess, kind of drove me there of motivating the use of at least that kind of component was, starting with this. So, I mean, I don't know nothing about the literature that you're referencing, but kind of starting with looking at, okay, well, in all the research related to this, is there somewhere where there's an inconsistency, right? Where somebody's where they haven't, where all these studies are finding different causal relationships. So that was my motivation for using, like I said, this, certain very limited components of the IED framework, and just kind of a general way of thinking about targeting. It was that I basically argue in the, one of the first chapters of the dissertation, hey, look, everybody's getting all these different results, and how violence actually affects election outcomes and affects voters. This inconsistency is probably because we don't have a good theoretical framework for thinking about how we think about violence. So that was kind of the approach that I took to motivate using at least those components of it. So I don't know if in your literature, if there's I don't know, something that has not been very well conceptualized, and then being able to say, oh, well, look, existing research can't really explain this because they get all these different findings and there's no consensus. This can probably help resolve that inconsistency.
Interesting. Thank you.
I think we've run through the questions here. Sorry, I was trying to read them sort of. Anybody else before we? Well, Homa, I'd like to thank you for sharing the paper as always. And for those of you whose patience for getting this started today, for Jess for, stepping in at the sort of the last minute, and for going to his different Zoom link, which is always, one of the pitfalls of having Zoom is you can't be two places at once without magic. So very much appreciate that. And thank you for sharing with this. I would love to follow up with you more as this develops. If you're interested, I'm sure Brian, as always, would give you the same feedback. He is certainly one of our very frequent contributors and someone that we owe a debt of gratitude to for sharing links and everything else. I should have looked who's next week. Scott, do you know who next week is? Sorry, I should have done don't forget next week. And I forgot to look.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Next week is Tanya.
It's me.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then we have Eric Jardine from Virginia Tech at the colloque on Monday. But don't forget, that's all good to remember as well, that we have Abby York tomorrow, and her talk at O'Neill at noon, which will be a lot of fun. So hope we can attend that.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice job, Homa.
Yeah.